Well, good morning and good afternoon. I'm Tom Sturr, the Vice President of Content and Programs at the Cybersecurity Collaborative, and I want to welcome our members and guests to our briefing titled Effective Cybersecurity Policies for AI and Emerging Technologies. Before we begin, just a couple of housekeeping items. If you have any questions, please enter them in the question box. We will get to them at the end of the virtual briefing, if not before. I encourage all members to take the poll at the end, and we have a few questions. We'd like to get some information and your feedback on the virtual briefing and some aspects of the collaborative. There's a lot of content and information on these slides, and the slides themselves can be received at the end of the presentation. There'll be an email you can address. And I encourage everyone to know there is a CPE credit that's offered at the end of that. So please take advantage of that. So I'd like to introduce our panelists today. These are members that have been on the policies team and vastly contributed to the content and the discussion we've had. I'll first welcome James Gibson, CISO of BlueHalo. James, thank you for being here today. Tell us a little bit about BlueHalo and your role there.
Well, BlueHalo is a relatively new company within the Department of Defense engineering space. We were established a little over 2.5 years ago, and we're made up of 14 different heritage organizations. So we're in the process of taking all of our heritage organizations material and synthesizing things under the new BlueHalo banner for future endeavors.
Great. Well, welcome. Thank you very much. I'll introduce Raul Iglesias from Regions Bank. Raul.
Thank you all. Thank you all for this opportunity. Like they said, with Regions Bank, it's a regional bank out here. Probably familiar with a lot of people are familiar with it. I'm based out of Arkansas, of all places. I fell into the abyss of policy and standard writing because some leader realized that my background was doing this at my previous employer. So I help out at Regions Bank performing the reviews of the information security policy and standards and assisting the owners with the writing, updating, and publishing of those to make them hopefully very effective and readable.
Well, Raul, we really appreciate it. You have some very good ideas that we capitalized on here, and we'll share those in the presentation. So again, thanks for joining. I think Sally Lula will be joining us shortly, so we'll introduce her when she comes on board. And finally, I'd like to introduce Kyle Way.
Hey, Tom, thank you. Kyle Way, I lead InfoSec for Heaven Hill. I've been there since early 2022. And so I've got all aspects of information security, including policy, controls, et cetera. So thanks for the opportunity to be here. Been a part of the Cybersecurity Collaborative since last year.
So thank you, and we appreciate all your input and participation on our task forces. Let's see if we can move on here. So what I'd like to do is just take a moment for our guests here to talk a little bit about the Cybersecurity Collaborative in our approach to helping each other solve our security problems and issues. We are a collaborative, vendor-neutral model. Members from multiple industries come together to talk about various security topics and issues. And we get best practices and information by sharing, not only in our task forces that we meet on particular topics, but through our Slack channel and communications that we have among our members. You basically partner up with other members to work on different challenges that you're having. It's a different model. Consultants and analysts all have their purpose and value, but ours is basically one where we are sharing our real world best practices and challenges together and working on things. This collaborative is a useful group, not only for CISOs, but I also remind the CISOs that it's also a benefit for the staffs. For the CISO, every morning you get a daily morning security report. It comes out at 6:30 Eastern. It tells you all about the main security events and news. You're never walking in to your boss's office blindsided about a potential event. It's also valuable for your threat intelligence program, your security awareness program about what's going on in the industry. The CISOs also have an Ask the Expert rapid response. You can put a question in and collaborate immediately with other CISOs, and they can participate on our task forces and boards as well. For the staffs, we do have a content library of hundreds of items. I'll show you some of the things in there that they can benefit from. There's a CP opportunity that you get for participating in our task forces, but we also have 100 webinars that they can go in and meet their 40-hour CPE requirements. And again, they can collaborate with other staff in other organizations. So again, we're here as a collaborative organization, defining best practices for the CISOs and for their staff. So we encourage members to join. Today, I'm going to give you a little background on the task force, talk about our deliverables. The thing we want to talk about is policy postulates for the security of all technologies, including AI. One of the things here is we are going to talk about some basic good policy best practices. If you're looking at the AI challenge right now, if you do not have a good policies program and all its components, it's going to be more difficult for you to be able to manage the security and the benefits that you can potentially get from AI. So we want to talk about that. We'll provide task force guidance on 4 components of one of those postulates. Traditional AUP and IT policy examples will show you the content of some of these. And then we'll talk about policies for managing demand of AI. We're going to show you an actual AI use policy, TOC. Summary and panel guidance. And then we'll talk about our current and planned task forces for the Cybersecurity Collaborative. And some of the content we put together, followed by a Q&A. So the task force, as I mentioned, is organizations representing different industries and agencies. You can see the number of organizations, members who are here, but others from different organizations. And we include members from universities that have contributed here to this task force on some great policy examples and how they manage these things. Again, financial institutions, management, manufacturing, et cetera. We believe a variety of different organizations, regardless of the industry, can contribute great ideas amongst each other. Here, as I mentioned, members share the successes, false starts, challenges. We're all under NDA, and we're all helping each other. And there's value from collaboration as much as from the deliverables. Let me just open up the panel here. Your thoughts, James, Raul, Kyle, what value did you get particularly from this task force, and how has collaboration helped you in your policies challenge?
Well, certainly we were able to see other perspectives. We're mainly government focused in our world, military defense, and to see the perspectives from manufacturing, finance, food production, all of that, educational, academic, provided different visions of how people are using their information technology systems and the policies that are required for those organizations. Some of that overlaps with us quite a bit, actually. So it was time well spent hearing those perspectives and being able to incorporate them into our own thought processes.
Great.
I'm going to jump in there, Tom. We don't come from a heavily regulated industry, so that's something that getting the perspective of others was huge for us. We're an 88-year-old company, but from the policy perspective, we've got a lot of work to do. So seeing some of the best practices, taking some of the templates from the team where they were able to share, that was very valuable.
Great, thank you, Kyle. Well.
So for me, I joined late to the task force, and I'll tell you, they welcomed me with open arms. I think I attended the last 2 meetings before it was over, and just hearing that I'm not going crazy and that similar challenges are being faced in the industry, all the different industries were facing very similar challenges as I am, and I always find that interesting. The other thing that I find fascinating is how companies balance compliance, regulatory alignment with how they're actually writing the policies and standards to produce a meaningful, useful, and effective way to communicate. You know, staff need to understand what it is that they're responsible for. They need to understand their role in the compliance process. And if it's not written in such a way, I think it loses some of that meaning. So I really enjoyed hearing from everyone on topics such as that.
Well, you came in toward the end of it, but you added tremendous value, and which is why I dragged you into this, because especially with the approach that you've taken and your experience here. So I'm very delighted. I think, is Sally on now?
Yes, hi.
Welcome, Sally, Senior Vice President of Northern Trust. And I wanted Sally on here because she has a very interesting framework that we're going to share together. So Sally, anyway, we certainly, I'm sorry about the technical difficulties and having you come in, but I'm happy you're here. So,
Yeah.
from your perspective, what did you think about our task force and the collaborative aspects of it?
It was really helpful. As Raul also said, we all have different regulators. Obviously, I come from a banking industry, so the financial industry is heavily regulated. And on top of that, we're a global company. So we have various regulations, not only locally, but elsewhere as well. So it's really important to, be a bit more comprehensive in the types of activities that we're doing. But I think for me, it's hearing from my colleagues here, from the participants, sharing of information was really, really helpful. I hope, everyone feels the same way, but that was the highlight, is really getting to connect with people. I feel like I can reach out to anybody from the collaborative, and people seem to be very helpful and willing to help.
Good, thank you. And again, as I mentioned, your three-tiered framework is something we'll talk about today, because it's extremely valuable to hear about how, even though it's largely adopted in the financial industry and insurance industry, it has some significant advantages, especially for ensuring that risks are covered and communication. So we'll talk about that. Again, I'm delighted you're here. So I'll just share the task force deliverables we're completing is a guide to effective security policies, which really picks up a lot on what we're talking about today in narrative as well. And then some of the templates that we're putting together, and we have some now, is we have a unified policy that we publish most aspects for smaller organizations, the general acceptable use policy, and then an AAP acceptable use policy. Actually, it's an AI acceptable use policy that we have as well. So let's begin. And policies, I remember years ago, and again, I've been in this business for a while, no one really wanted to have them. They said, well, the more you put down on paper, the more liable you're going to be. I remember getting arguments, just to have a statement saying we're doing the best we can, or we're really managing the security of your data, well, which is not a good statement. And then regulation came in, and people found out that they really had to put a stake in the ground and defend their security programs on the basis of actually, putting in the controls and making sure that people are following them. So that whole paradigm has changed. And again, we have a task force on something that's been around for years, but is continually evolving. And again, AI comes into the mix here, and how do we use our policy structure to manage the whole AI revolution that's coming along? But there are 4 postulates that we're going to talk about. And again, it's for all your IT environments, but also for AI. Policy objectives must be understood. There are 4 components that are required to achieve those objectives. I want to come back to those. The objectives and components must align to the end of the size of an organization. One of the revelations that came out of this task force is that there isn't one size that fits all. We find out that the old, you used to buy these policy books with 500 different policies. That isn't going to work trying to implement an organization, but there are structures and things that you use depending upon the size of your organization I think as Sally mentioned, the degree of regulation and requirements of doing that. The last thing that came up over here is that many of the members are actually going through a refresh initiative to address changing regulatory and business requirements. So, again, this is not something that you put in place and forget about. It has to be very active and to work. So what are the 4 objectives? You can probably find more than this. Compliance, you got to meet compliance obligations. PCI came in and changed the paradigm for many companies in 2005 in terms of requiring policies and certain things. But another thing, of course, is risk. And this is what I like about Sally's framework we'll talk about. It really addresses, it brings in risks. And Raul was also mentioning that when he develops policies. What risks are we trying to address in writing these policies? The third is the InfoSec program, demonstrated, documented, operational security program. But the last one are practices. You can actually take this acronym and call it TRIST. But the practices are incorporate these security within IT and business practices. You want people, the security doesn't have management over everything does, but they want those people to take the policy and be able to use them and operationalize them. And that's the challenge that we've had over the years with policies. So what you need to do, part of the acronyms, but it's a good way to remember things, is put a face on things. Start with a framework. You're going to have controls that are going to be based on, you're going to have a structure of some kind. You'll have a table of contents in all of these, and you'll have to deal with roles and responsibilities. Second part is you do have to administer them. It's not something you're going to spend time and people and resource to do this. That includes staffing, drafting, approving, reviewing, and having some repository and support tools to help. Communication as well to constituents, employees, contractors, and third parties, tools, formats, and methods as well. And lastly, enforcement. Enforcement is obviously audit. If you have an audit organization, if there are violations of policy, how do you address them? But another big area is exceptions. There are going to be exceptions to policies as we go along. So again, all 4 elements, base, framework, administration, communication, enforcement, need to be in place to have them work. So again, this is a very detailed slide. This will be available to you so you can look at this. One of the things that we came up with here is in terms of framework, administration, communication, enforcement, there are going to be differences based upon the size of the organization, the amount of regulation. And these aren't hard and fast categories. You may pick and choose depending on the size of the organization from among all 3. But some highlights here. In terms of the document structure, there are three structures we came up with. One is a kind of a unified policy structure for small organizations with small numbers of staff. You don't want to have 50 different policies to maintain. You'll never use them. The other is a tiered policy structure, and we're going to go into these. And then what Sally comes up, the lines of defense policy structure, a very robust way of engaging different organizations to ensure that your policies are addressing controls and risk. The other thing I'll highlight is policies and standards targeted to specific functional areas. In terms of designing some of these, rather than having an organization like development or business operation have to reference 6 different policies to figure out what they need to do. Some organizations are structuring standards directly at specific functional units. So all the requirements are there. It means there's some duplication elsewhere, but there's a one-stop place for these organizations to look at this. Secondly, and especially for large organizations, you are going to have more approval bodies, and you'll be someone drafting it, more individuals involved with drafting. You may have the use of a website for employee access or a GRC tool, some tool that manages the workflow from approvals, simply because it gets very complicated in the large organizations. You may also find out you're using different methods of communicating these, like Yammer, the GRC tool, or the concept of the BISOs of security reps and functions in businesses. So everyone talks about what is the role of a BISO, a business information security officer, and so forth. One of that is to communicate these requirements, and it is a very valuable means in organizations. Lastly, in the large organizations, there'll be a documented exception process, more formal form. One of the things here we'll talk about is there has to be sort of an approval timeframe and a review. Oftentimes, that doesn't happen. So again, the medium-sized organizations kind of conglomerate of the left and the right, and smaller organization, you won't have the formal approval bodies typically just because you need to manage them. The point behind this slide is that there are many ways that you can approach this, but you got to look at the size of regulatory environments to really frame, administer, communicate, and enforce your policies. The last thing is there's going to be scope creep. Policies must address new regulatory requirements. Policies must be relevant to new business initiatives, organizational changes, and threats. Gauge the levels, policies, access, compliance, and feedback from stakeholders to help determine when a refresh is needed. Refresh efforts are going to take longer than you think. Members wanted to do it in 4 months. It's often going to take 18 months to do. And minimally, the review the policies for relevancy and changes every year. That's the typical compliance requirement. Are any of you going through a refresh right now or thinking of it?
We're actually doing kind of a company-wide refresh right now, and including IT and security as part of that. As I said, we're a smaller organization. We don't have as much rigor around some things. Obviously, we do have around others. So we're trying to bake that refresh into the larger refresh, and it aligns very closely to your year to 18 months. And that's, you know, kind of company-wide. So we're hitting the high topics in relation to security and IT as a whole, and then wrapping that into the greater review of all policies.
Right. So it's a big effort, and obviously you need to do it. I just, as you said, encourage people to give yourself time to do this, you know, to be able to do it right. And I think that was a key insight that you provided our task force. Anyone else before we move on?
Hey, Tom, I'll chime in. This is Raul. So recently the SEC took out a notification rule that's now going to go into place in December. So that, for an example, that triggered an entire process internally to review all of our policies and standards requiring disclosure, SEC disclosures. And now we have to go back and ensure that our processes are all aligned and in place to meet that new SEC requirement. So that's just one very recent example. It's going to affect all SEC organizations.
Yeah. We are also currently going through a refresh of our policy, the cyber and tech policy. And definitely, you know, the policy is definitely a high level document. So we have a separate framework, which is an extension of the policy, which engages, you know, the CISO, head of, you know, tech risk as well. We have a selected group of individuals that we're working with, but we're currently going through a refresh process as well.
And we're going through a refresh due to CMMC version 2 compliance. We're getting ready for our audit, and by using an external organization, they came in, looked at our policies, and did a gap analysis for our pre-assessment. So that triggered a review of current policies and the addition of some new ones as well.
Interesting. Well, I hadn't chosen the panelists on the basis of being able to support this particular topic, but it just goes to show that, you know, and I had asked this before, that you're all going through it. We have to continually refresh it. You need the resource, the structure in place to do that. So anyway, thank you for sharing that. So I'm going to just run through a little bit of, we talked about FACE. You know, let's talk about policies, frameworks, and different structures on this. And we have an example of this one. So the unified policy structure for small organizations usually consists of 3 parts to this, and it can be all in one policy. So the idea of standards are kind of built slightly off of this. I'll go through it, but Generally, there's a security policy statement and framework up front that's management support for your program and the purpose of the policy. Then there's a user-related responsibilities controls, acceptable use policy, and that can be actually taken out of this. But for small organizations, it could be also left in here. And then they're functionally related controls relate to a framework like data protection, access management, passwords, etc. The advantage of this in a small organization is that it's all in one place. People know how to get to it. And you can have an appendix that define roles and responsibilities and where they need to look at. The other thing that you will end up doing if you're starting this process, you're going to add an incident response plan, business continuity plan, probably a third-party risk management standard on how you're actually measuring these things, especially if you're ISO certified or PCI and so forth, and certainly financial, New York State financial requirements, and possibly a risk assessment standard again if you're ISO certified. And as I mentioned, the advantages is that users go to one place and there's a low policy maintenance. In small organizations, you often can't afford one individual doing all the policy work. It's often one person part-time with additional help. Sort of the tiered policy structure, and many organizations have this, is you really have in this reference of policy standards, guidelines, references, procedures. You can have a policy statement as general requirements and specific requirements identified as standards pretty much. So again, you have tier one, the management commitment. Two, you have key policies. And at the lower level, you can see different references and procedures and guidelines. References might be responsibility, an org chart or something like that. And for medium to large organizations, provide robust requirements and guidance to different business functions and businesses. You got to worry about navigability a little bit in terms of from a policy to a standard or multiple standards. But in this case, the policy is a general statement. The standard it says, we want to protect access. That's very vague, but a little bit stronger than that. And how we're doing is require a 12-character password that is robust, whatever it might be, would be stated in the standard. So, so again, this is what a lot of organizations have adopted, especially with multiple business functions and in different areas. The third area, and Sally can comment to this, is I call it the lines of defense, because I think that's the way you discussed it. It kind of goes into defense in depth a little bit, but there are tiers that align organizational responsibilities to ensure the relevance and effectiveness of these policies. And there's an upper tier oversight, a middle tier chief risk officer, technology risk committee, and a lower tier audit that ensures that policies have been implemented, all kind of working together in this framework. Adopted by the financial and insurance agencies. Review and use of policy standards by different organizations ensures that they address risks and be implemented or enforced. So this kind of brings it to the core of everyone. And there's a checks and balances process that occurs here to make sure that one group isn't writing something and leaving out a key element of risk. And Sally, I'll turn it over to you. I may have not stated this as you have put this together, but I think it's a very good structure. Yeah.
So this is back in 2021, 2022, we actually hired PwC to kind of look at all our overall governance structure and policy and standard. And this is a framework that they have leveraged. And for our purpose, we have the framework as a high level, but really from the way I'm kind of interpreting this is what they provided us, but really I would put policy on top of framework, because the policy kind of sets the direction, the foundation, the overall objective of how we govern cyber and tech risk for the organization. And then the framework would be an extension of that policy. The framework would then go ahead and really provide deep dive in the specific roles, responsibility within both the first and second line, and also addresses risk appetite. But also in our area, we have something called risk treatment. Risk treatment involves two things. One is risk exception, where we say we're going to accept this risk for a certain period of time because we decided to do something, or we accept we said we're going to accept this risk because the impact or magnitude is not to the level, or it's not outside of appetite. So we also talk about in the framework about risk treatment and issue management. And the supporting standards, I've seen some of the companies that we've worked in the last few weeks, they call their standards policy. Standards really talks about what at a minimum we should have. So they are the control requirements that we expect, us in both first, second line, especially in the first line, where they have a lot of processes to implement specific requirements. So the standards are mandate what they should be doing. And then, the procedures are the how they're going to be implementing those mandates and the standards. So I know one of the company that we've talked, they said they have a ton of policies, but those are really standard. But the policy again sets those foundational directional element. So this is the framework that we use, how we structured our documents, governing
That's a
documents.
nice
And
way
then
of doing the standard.
and then we have committees who reviews and approves these documents.
If you use this structure, yeah, go ahead. Sorry, someone. Yeah, I was just going to say, if you use this structure, then the standards tell you how to implement policy. You can almost align them to different organizational groups as well, and bring that in. I mean, it's kind of the benefit of it, and then procedures are obviously driven off this thing. So it's a very, very good way. It does require administrative overhead to this, and people have to participate in the reviews and structuring it. But as you said, it does work to bring them down into the organization and ensure that all stakeholders have a say in making sure that policies are covering it and standards are covering what needs to be covered. So excellent. So in the interest of time, I'm just going to run through some of the guidance that we have here. And again, these slides are available to everyone. They're available to cooperative members. They'll be out posted next week, and then we'll add the guidance documents as well. This is just an example of the table of contents that you would typically see in it. This document history, if you're ISO, you've got to have it. I've seen it up front, could be down in the back, either way. Responsible office, who's responsible for this? Terms is another thing that you really should do. And then one member mentioned there's a NIST glossary term. Terms can be, problem is with policies, there's a lot of, I'd say, drift in terms of the use of certain terms and policies and standards. You can formalize them. You can use NIST to help you do that and keep them consistent. And refresh items are actually probably looking at, tightening up some of the terms in there. Roles and responsibilities. I think we said, don't, in a general policy, you wouldn't put them, but you put in the standard, you could do as a separate reference, but they need to be defined in terms of who is responsible for this. And there's the statements, and oftentimes they will refer to NIST, ISO, maybe UI 171, whatever it might be. Violations and exceptions process should be put in, references, appendices, maybe contact lists and approval. Are typical things that happen. And these are just examples of contents, TOCs that members have provided us. The other thing I wanted to talk about is, in terms of the administration's security policy drafts, we said of the responsibility of the cybersecurity organization, primarily don't have legal rights, and this isn't to disparage anyone in the legal community. But you obviously will get input from legal and stakeholders to do that. But someone typically in the cybersecurity organization is responsible for drafting them. Require stakeholders to review them, as I mentioned. Require executives or a cross-functional team to approve them. And again, leverage some workflow tools. If you have a robust policy structure, you might want to use a GRC tool or some type of workflow tool to help with the approvals process. And then a member's guide to effective policy drafts. And Raul, you'll have to excuse me, I probably added a few more things than you wanted added in here. And really love the beginning letter R and all of these. But I liked what you said about researching, looking at the risks, with outreach, roles and responsibilities. Reader, right? intelligibility for the reader, and of course relevance in terms of measuring compliance. And at the team, you came in toward the end. You really talked about having done this and how you would approach writing a policy. And I really liked what you said here, and I thought that we should share this with our members and guests as well. I don't know if you have any other comments about this, or maybe you'll throw tomatoes at me after we're done. But
No, I appreciate it. Yeah, it's the writing for intelligibility is I think it's a key component of the communication of it, making those policies, those standards really an effective control, administrative control, albeit, but an effective control for an organization. It helps drive compliance, I believe. You know, if everyone understands what their role is, like Sally was saying, in the lines of defense, right? If you are first line person, you know, you have to understand what those responsibilities are. If the standard is written in such a way that it's not meaningful, it's not scoped well, it may lose some of that. So I think there's a lot of value in that.
yeah, and write for the reader. Actually have someone maybe look at it after you've written it to see if it still makes sense. Yeah, I think that's a good point. Move on here. In terms of communicating, there are a number of ways to do that. Emails, tools like Yammer or GRC tool, the internet site. You mentioned the GRC tool, security awareness training. Definitely should talk about ways to communicate your policy. But we mentioned leveraging help from managers and security representatives in the business and function units, the CISOs, regional information security leads. Having managers actually as part of the all hands meetings, I found a very effective way to talk about policies and policy changes. And again, if you're lucky, you have some support in your security teams, you actually go out and participate in those all hands meetings. It's a very effective way to make sure users are understanding where the policies are, what they're responsible for. But it is important that this message gets down to everyone. And security awareness training is often done, but it really should be done more frequently than just the annual training. Customers provide copies or redacted copies when requested as part of their evaluation security program. They're going to ask if you have policies, and oftentimes they want to see them. So oftentimes putting in a TOC will satisfy that, but they want to see whether or not you really do have a robust set of policies and standards, as evidence of your security program. And third parties, again, those third parties you're hiring as well. Don't submit your policies in needs of data requirements. Incorporate key. In other words, don't just ship out your policies to say to third parties, this is what you need to comply with. You really need to take elements of your policies and put it into your security evaluation process of those third parties, and then incorporate that in your contracts. That's another topic, but I've seen members just ship out 30 policies to the third parties. They're not going to look at them. And as far as enforcement, try to keep track of, if you can, how many people are looking at this now. In terms of views, clicks, number of downloads. Are people actually looking at these things? And if not, why is that the case? Is the awareness getting that way? Audit findings are repeatable findings. Determine issues with the quality of the policy and the communication methods. So if there's always an access audit finding or something like that, well, where is it happening? Who's doing it? And why aren't the policies maybe addressing it as effectively as they should be? As an exception process, you have to create some kind of exception form. The one thing I would highlight, there's got to be a period for this. It's not indefinite. That's what happens is that sometimes they just drift. So you need to re-review them and look for mitigating controls. And again, with the exception periods up to date, you got to readdress it. The other thing in enforcement, weigh and consider them. Obviously, serious violations. The AUP is often used by legal for serious HR violation. You may want to consider taking an educational approach in terms of educating users in terms of what they need to do. They may be unaware. The insider threat is not just malicious; it's ignorance. Here's an opportunity to kind of address that through, a good policy structure and communication.
Hey, Tom, if I could jump in there in that last statement, one of the things that I implemented in my previous company was feedback on policies or standards,
Very good
really
idea.
opening the door to any questions that anyone may have on any confusing statements. That really helped me frame these standards and these policies in a way that made more sense to our staff. So just a consideration.
I like that, and that's not on here, so I'm gonna take that down. Excellent. Yeah, get some feedback, you know, usability of the reader, but get feedback. If they're confused, they can't use them, and you know, how am I actually going to implement this? You know, then you need to have a discussion and see where you can improve it. But again, these things can be improved. You know, you're not just putting a statement down. You know, it's part of your program and part of the continuous improvement process. Thank you for bringing that up, Raul. So here are some examples of acceptable use and functional control policy. I've kind of shown the functional controls policy. With the acceptable use, those are some key elements that would be included. People have said including consent to be monitored and address casual business conversations on airplanes. Something that's left out is, you know, your verbal discussion or what you might be showing in a public place can actually reveal confidential information. I've actually seen that happen to the detriment of the company, and so that is something to consider in putting in it. Keep it short, 10 pages. People are talking about keeping it short. Can include work at home and BYOD requirements. Not everyone does, but it could be talking about main work at home requirements using an approved router, for example. Don't over prescribe is something get so little that it's very difficult to people to comprehend and read. Make sure you have HR and legal in the review group. I tried to do this in my experience with legal writing it. They weren't able to adopt things, so I ended up writing it and then reviewing it with them. I think to the point people were saying, legal needs to be involved in these things without question. Don't feel you can not involve them, but the writing of it, I think, comes to the reader who's going to use it and be able to understand this. And they can read 10 pages. Some say it should be 3 or 4. But if you have 25 highly prescriptive pages, it's not going to be looked at. The other thing that came out of the team is that there isn't just one AUP, and we're going to show one for AI in a second here. There's a standard one for everyone. One had one for privileged users and what they expect to do, and others external partners with non-standard access. So I thought that was an interesting variation on what the acceptable use policy was. So that's some of our key guidance. Let's talk about AI a little bit more directly. And they are a key component of 5 CISO responsibilities for managing AI demand. I want to talk about these 5 things that we are actually addressing in our Cyber Collaborative AI Task Force. One is, you know, policies are a part of this, but you need to understand the AI landscape in terms of business use and also what's going on out there. Policies become very important because, you know, one way to get a handle initially on this is to develop an acceptable use policy and ultimately an architectural standard. You know, to be able to begin to put some governance structure in place. You're going to need a governance structure review body with a charter and a process for reviewing requests, user awareness, communication to the board CISO, you're going to have to do that, and eventually establishing a safe operating environment. And this is something that we're working on right now, but it became so topical that in our policies committee, we felt we had to come up with an AI acceptable use policy that was member contributed. And we do have that available for cybersecurity collaborative measures. This is an example of the TUC. And we're finding so far, and again, in our AI task force, we've just begun this. Some companies are prohibiting AI until a governance structure is totally put in place. Others are permitting potential use by implementing a request process and risk evaluation. So your AI acceptable use policy will vary depending on your company's AI risk posture. Some AUQs will prohibit it, others will permit it with restrictions on the use of company data, others will reference a process for reviewing use requests or approving or denying based on business value and risk. Companies right now feel that from a policy standpoint, they've got to put out an AI accepted use policy. If they haven't got a governance structure in place, some of them are saying, hold off, can't do it, including prohibiting the use of it on personal laptops for company business, okay, just because they're trying to get a governance structure in place. Others are saying it's going to happen, so they're putting in, acceptable uses of this and so forth. They're showing the risks. You can see here on the right, what are the risks of public AI like ChatGPT? And others have put this out, but also established a request process that allows business units, users to request using this and then figuring out how they're going to use it. And they're even going as far as establishing a user perimeter to allow use of ChatGPT in certain ways and obviously adjusting requests. So all of this is coming out of the work of the AI task force. But from a policy standpoint, which we want to bring this up here, you need to put an acceptable use policy. We have a very good template for our members and those who wish to join to use. And again, you have to adjust it to the appetite of your business, but you need to get on this pretty quickly. So we're kind of running into the end of the time here, and I want to make sure we can hear a lot of chat discussions here. So CISOs, you're not going to stop the demand for AI in organizations and by your users as much as you want to do that. You can manage it as you have with IT and cloud implementations or other new technologies by creating policies and standards and establishing a safe environment. And we say to do that and effectively use policies to help you with your AI initiatives, you need to make sure that your objectives are fully understood by everyone and followed, that you have the 4 components, that they align those components to your organization, and that you're refreshing them, including a refreshment that would consider AI in doing this. So with that, we're going to address some audience questions. There'll be a poll coming up in a second. Before I do that, one of the questions in the poll is, are you interested in joining Cybersecurity Collaborative ISO 27001-2002 preparation working group? I'm going to talk about that a little bit later on, but since the poll question is up here, a lot of companies are being asked by their customers to have a valid external substantiation of their security programs, either SOC 2 Type 2 or ISO 27002 certification. So we thought a very good way to help members is in a collaborative session is to bring everyone together over a 4 to 6 month period, provide all the templates that you need for this, although you may have your own templates and you can use them, but provide the guidance that you need for all you need to do to become prepared to the ISO 27001 certification. And by collaborating, you get good value from other people. Collaboration may even help solve your internal audit issues that you need to do with this. And I'll get to this slide. But if you're interested at all, I would suggest you check it. That will gauge whether or not we're going to go forward with this. And of course, we're going to gauge that with our internal numbers. But while you're answering the poll, let me just run by the panel quickly. What tip would you give at the end of all this for improving organizations compliance? What last word of advice would you give to our members here? Anyone want to open up? Kyle?
Probably my closing tip would be one that you echoed earlier. Give yourself a fair amount of time, as it is going to take some time to get buy-in, to be able to find time to have people to dedicate to reviewing, and then obviously provide that feedback that you need to move any progress forward. And then, we've given some kind of guidance, but I think it's pretty subjective in relation to the organization. What works for one organization might not work for the next. So I saw some questions in the chat around, should there be one very large policy that includes some of these subsets, or should it be broken out? And I think, again, not a non-answer, but I think it depends on the organization and the really what everyone can get accomplished. It's better to have something in place as opposed to having nothing. And just don't let the paralysis in relation to that be a reason that you don't get something in place. That's kind of my final guidance.
Okay. Excellent. Anyone else?
I echo what Kyle said. I think, knowing your stakeholders is really critical. Subject matter experts, especially if you have a lines of defense type of framework that you follow, depending on who owns the standard. In our case, the standards are owned by the first line of defense, and we own the policy and framework. So we have a responsibility to review and challenge what first line of defense does. So for our specific governance document, we also have to do the same. We need to identify the right subject matter expert, and time is really critical. If you're highly regulated organizations, or if you're in that industry, definitely you are required to maintain these documents on an annual basis. So make sure that you have the right time and the right subject matter experts.
Excellent.
And from my point of view, I'm the one that takes the position of the reader, right? I'm very big on that. Number one, I'm going to give extra points to Eric in the chat stating, what about using AI to create the policy? I thought that was hilarious. So you get some extra points for that one. But as it relates to a question, I just provided a response. How do you get people involved in policies and standards? It's horrible to read these things, okay? I mean, it's the truth is the truth, right? As a highly regulated organization, we have to have these things in place. But how you find the way to include your staff, like they were saying, security awareness training programs, the key controls that you have to comply with, or if you get with your audit team before you do your security awareness training program, and you say, man, what are the biggest areas that we're failing to meet, or where are you seeing a lot of issues at? Look at your exceptions. Where are we getting a lot of requests for exceptions? Maybe it's an opportunity for you to enhance your program and get these controls out there, get these statements out there, get the conversations going. Some of the conversations can be negative. They could be upset because of a new control, but it's conversation. That was what was key for me in my previous role. Was for every standard that I published, I created a SharePoint site where I actually listed out what was actually changed, not a very high level summary of whatever. No, what actually changes that impacts the individual reader, the people that are in scope. And I encourage them, if you have questions, reach out to me, reach out to the standard owner, reach out to the policy owner and ask questions. And it really worked. You can gamify policies and standards. I mean, this is a lot of work, but you could hide like Easter eggs inside your policies and standards to get them to actually open it. I think your metrics for how many policies were actually read are going to go off, but it's one way to gamify the thing. What is the correct way to handle a situation X in the organization as it relates to policies and standards? People that respond correctly, the top 5 people get a prize. When you gamify it in a large organization, I found it actually encourages feedback, encourages dialogue, encourages people to literally share the answers with each other, but they're still talking about it. They'll know where the policy website is. You'll be surprised of how many people you ask, how do you get to the policies and standards? And they will have no idea in organizations. So the key consideration is just looking at the questions that are coming in.
Excellent. Let me just finish up here, and then I want to go back and answer the questions. Just for those here, these are some of the task forces that are in force. The AI working group is obviously in operation, digging into a standard for this. Someone asked about a third party policy. We do have actually a third party policy, but from the AI perspective, that's something that we're working on as a group. Someone asked about, we did generate an AI acceptable use policy, I think using AI, or maybe an acceptable use, I can't remember. But you still have to kind of look at and tailor to your organization. It's good for getting ideas without doubt, but again, you still have to apply your organizational needs to that. Someone said AI 10, yeah, 10 is still a lot. I would agree, 2 or 3 pages. We do have an example of that. Again, your security awareness program and how you're communicating it to get to bring that into more reality is something you might need to add there. These are the task forces under consideration. The ISO piece here, just for those who may have answered it or are answering it, is essentially we're looking at a group providing the templates, as I mentioned, 4 to 6 months. These are to the right. You can see all the documentation and guidance you're going to need to put it together. I've had people say, well, are they really serious about looking at this? They look at it rigorously and they'll give you a major or minor nonconformity if you don't have them, and they'll stop the audit if you haven't done these things. We feel we have some expertise and some collaborative opportunities to really help members through this without having to hire large consulting organizations to get through that. So we'll hope you consider it. And again, we've provided a lot of documents to our document library. They're all available to members. You can see some of them here on different topics. So we'll try to finish up some of the questions here. Does the task force recommend one all-inclusive policy or individual policy specific controls, such as passwords? I kind of think it's really relevant to your organization. When you say specific policies or standards, that's often a better way to do it. But if you're a small organization of 27, you're administratively not going to be able to do it. And that's my experience in working with a number of them. So I would gauge that to the slide that we had in the middle. In our company, we have all users certified to reading acceptable use policy. Who should get the master security policy? Everyone? Oh, the one that we put up there. Not necessarily. This is where a standard would come in, and so if you had a standard access management was going to your IAM team, that might pull in it. Sorry to answer these relatively quickly. I think they're very, very good questions. Yeah, I would agree with Jim. Mentioned that standards are not for policies, but I have to say for small organizations, they don't break them out just because of the communication aspects of it. My company, how would you recommend broaching the conversation that with GRC, they should be leveraging our teams effectively for writing? Oh, here's one. There's a lot of movement on wanting to use AI at my company, and my CEO had made the decision to hire a consultant to write our AI AUP. How would you recommend broaching the conversation that with GRC leadership in the firm, they should be leveraging our teams effectively for writing these and saving the funds for consultants? Well, I definitely think the other team should be involved. If the consultant can be used to help bring everyone together with that expertise, that's fine. If not, then you're still going to need it. Anyone else want to comment on that one? It's a interesting question.
That sounds like an RGE. That's a resume generating event if you don't cover that one the right way.
Yeah.
Good luck, Mia.
RGE, I haven't heard that.
Yeah, resume generating event. I would broach the topic with some careful conversations, probably.
Why can't AI be incorporated in application security related policies? Yeah, again, as we're getting to all aspects of AI, which is not only just at the user base, but also some of the other functional bases.
I think you can do that,
Yeah.
but right now, since it's such a new topic, to pull it out and give it its own policy highlights,
Right.
potential dangers and how your company really wants you to think about that process before you potentially step in a big hole.
Yeah, that's the governance side and really trying to understand what it is. There are, I guess you can use ChatGPT to write code and so forth, but again, how is it being done and et cetera. So I agree with that. Thank you, James, for that. Yeah, that's communications can be sent out. That's fine, but the acceptable use has been a way that members have successfully done it. What is the treatment when vendors are using AI? Big topic. We'll be getting to that. It's a very good one. And our AI groups are looking at that.
I like Aaron's question around who has enough expertise to consult on AI, as it's so new. I mean, that's a very good point.
Very good.
That's a valid. I agree with that point as well.
One of the things is continually to learn about it, recognizing we all don't have the expertise and trying to figure that out. It's something that has to remain active in organizations, and we will have some output from that team coming up in September and October. So with that, I want to thank all my panelists here today for their arduous help in putting some great guidance together and adding some great points to this deck. I'd like to thank both our members of the collaborative and those who are considering joining to come join us and work collaboratively to help solve some of these issues. This presentation is available to everyone in the collaborative, and those who aren't on request. Actually, we get to the last slide because that'll tell you how to do it. You can see Tom Ward's email here. I'll leave that up. Please do send him a request for the presentation and any more information about the collaborative. So with that, I wish you all a wonderful rest of the Thursday afternoon, safe Friday and good weekend. And please reach out to us if you have any other questions regarding.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody. Thanks.